Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 192 of the podcast. In this episode, I talk with Terry Linhart about self-aware leadership, which we all want to be self-aware leaders, but do we do the hard work for that, right? And we also talk about teaching in youth ministry. And of course, that looks different now, but a lot of what we talk about applies to now, I think. And you can get all the links and notes and all of that at nickblevins.com/episode 192. Before we jump into that, I want to give a big thanks to our friends at Serve HQ who sponsor this podcast. And Serve HQ makes simple tools for ministry leaders to equip their volunteers, onboard new members, develop leaders, send announcements, and chat with anyone safely with accountability, all in one unified platform called Huddle Up. And communication looks different now. Certainly doesn't if you're listening to this when this podcast comes out. But things are changing fast. Churches are starting to talk about gathering in person again. And you need to communicate with your volunteers now, in some ways more than ever, because you're not together as much. And Huddle Up is a great resource for that. And you can learn more about that at nickblevins.com/servehq. And then we have a new family retention plan resource that we created with Ministry Boost. It released a few weeks ago. The new family retention plan is a 5-part framework for retaining more new families in your church. This is one of the areas that's kind of the low-hanging fruit of church growth because those people are already coming to our church, whether they watch online or they come in person. How can we help them take steps to get connected? So the new family retention plan is divided up into those 5 parts, the 5-part framework, and then has resources for each of those 5 parts. My favorite part of it is it's a full follow-up plan with every stage of it. So when they come for that first visit, what are the ways we follow up them? It has scripts for emails, texts, things like that. And then what if they don't come back in the next week or 2? What do we do then? It has all that built into it. And then when they do come back, how do we communicate then? We have emails and scripts and texts for that. What if they don't take that next step? How do we continue reaching out to them in a way that doesn't seem like we're stalking them, but at the same time is encouraging them to take those steps? So it's a full resource with 7 instructional videos, 10 job descriptions, 33 first-time guest gift ideas, 40 or more communication and follow-up scripts. So you're talking about 75 to 100 plus documents in this bundle. It's $25 now just for the next couple of weeks. That's until June 4th. So you have to buy it by June 4th. If you're listening to this when it comes out, you have a little over a week to get that resource. And then it'll be $99. And it will be included in our Ministry Boost membership, but membership won't open again probably until August. So you can check that out at ministryboost.org. Let's go ahead now and jump into my conversation with Terry Linhart about self-aware leadership and youth ministry teaching. Well, today we have Terry Linhart on the podcast. Welcome, Terry.
Hey, good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And we'd love to have you introduce yourself a little bit for anybody that's not familiar with you as we get going. So tell us about Terry.
Sure. Well, I have been in ministry for a long time. We won't even mention how many 30-some years it's been, but I started out in youth ministry and worship ministry, got involved in a church, and discovered some teaching gifting that God kind of tapped me on the shoulder about. And so I started on some graduate degrees and ended up at Bethel University in South Bend, Indiana here, where we today have about 3 or 4 inches of snow on the ground in April. It's not very fun, but and just a lot of opportunities to use the teaching in a variety of settings through speaking, through writing, written some books in the youth ministry and the leadership space, and just really pleased to be able to serve God right here. Almost 20 years now at Bethel, and a dynamic Christian institution. Really tickled, and we have a great online program. So when this virus thing hit, we were able to pivot really easily and move online because we have such an advanced online program. Our staff has put together something amazing. So we're still in stride and excited to be able to come out of this here in a few weeks, and have 3 grown kids, all married, and they married very well. So we're excited about that. And Kel's my wife, has a Visiting Angels business, which is a non-medical home care. So right now we're in the middle of taking care of people and making sure they're safe. But that's awesome. That's me.
Yeah, and I was thinking as you were talking about, your role at Bethel, I was about to ask, like, how have you pivoted or made changes, and knowing that you had that online program already developed. Are you guys looking, I'm just curious because, I feel like people are processing it differently and planning differently. Are you looking pretty far out when you think about, what's ahead for fall or next year or, what's the focus right now?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And I think everybody needs to do this. No matter what you're doing, you need to have a plan A, B, C, D. And D, of course, would be your worst case scenario. Fortunately, although it was painful, the last couple of years, Bethel has been very aggressively trimming its budget and getting to the point where we could be, essentially have a good balance sheet. And I think going forward, that's what churches and businesses and nonprofits are going to be doing, because this has exposed people who have been leveraged quite high. So Bethel financially was able to weather this a little bit and better than some Christian schools. And then we have a great board of trustees. So we financially can go for a while, even if this fall, we can't meet face to face. We're anticipating that we will be able to. We actually put commencement into August now. So we're anticipating actually being able to hold commencement services in August. That may be optimistic by some people's, judgment. Indiana hasn't been hit quite as hard, and there's some things we can do to make it fairly safe. But we at least have that on the schedule and are hoping to be face-to-face this fall. So we'll see. But, we're talking about, what's the economic fallout if students don't come back to school. But here's the surprising thing. When economic troubles hit like we're in right now, people reassess their lives and they say, next time I need to have a degree and a better job so that I can work through it at a little higher level. And so schools actually benefit from an economic downturn because people, suddenly realize, I need to have a job that's survivable. Last 3 or 4 years, college has been taking a hit. People go, you don't need a college degree to make money. And now, when you take away the ability to buy and sell, maybe management and supervision, is a little more appealing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that does make sense for sure. I wanted to talk about one of the books you mentioned. You've written some books. Is The Self-Aware Leader: Discovering Your Blind Spots to Reach Your Ministry Potential. Obviously, I think all of us want to be self-aware leaders, but all of us have blind spots and different levels of our self-awareness and all that. So I wanted to ask first, where do you think self-awareness begins?
Yeah, well, it begins so I was very careful in the book to make sure this wasn't just a self-help book that, you think good thoughts and you're a better person, but to root it in spiritual formation, that these are those moments where, and we see this in the Gospels, where Jesus comes along into people's lives and he stops and he listens, and then he asks a question about their desires. And, what do you want me to do for you? To someone who's blind or crippled. And he wants them to, and Ruth Haley Martin says this so well, naming our desires in front of Jesus is a really powerful thing. And so when we think about some of the issues that a lot of us have in our 20s and our 30s, and we face a new set of them in our 40s in ministry, it roots back to this idea of what is it we want. And that's a very powerful moment. So when you think about self-awareness and some of the things that we do, it's that we develop patterns and preferences over time, and we just need to be able to identify them. And it's difficult because you then have to wrestle ego to the ground to do it sometimes.
Sure. And you mentioned into your 20s, 30s, and into 40s and being different there. So I feel like I have to ask, what do you think was different at some of those different, seasons of life? And maybe it's a universal type thing.
Yeah, no, it's you're right. I think, in school, when we take psychology, we often hear about adolescent identity development and then extended adolescence to 25. And then it's just like there's suddenly this slide from 25 to 65 or 75. And there's nothing in between. But there are dramatic identity stages in the 20s. And I tell you where you see it in a church is when you try to do next gen ministry. And you've got singles, you've got married people, you've got people who went to college, people who didn't go to college, and people with kids. And there are 5 different groups in their 20s, but they all have very different, identity issues. And it's hard to get them together and have a common language sometimes in that ministry. But I think in your 40s, there's a whole new set of things. And I find now that I'm on the other side of that, I'm walking with a lot of 40-somethings in coaching and counseling relationships, just helping them navigate some things. Because what happens in the 40s, and people used to call it like a midlife crisis, but there's this assessment that goes on. And one of those things, a little surprise, is that your childhood comes back to revisit you. And some things you thought you had dealt with related to maybe mom or dad or social world comes up in a new and fresh way, and it causes people to be really surprised. I mean, some of the best people I know, myself included, thought you didn't even anticipate what those might be, and they come up in new ways, and you have to identify them and talk about them.
Yeah, and you talk about seeing your past in the book, and I want to ask before we dig into maybe some more pieces of the book. In thinking of like vocational ministry, people who are leading in churches, or maybe it's like nonprofit Christian organizations, and they're leading. I'm wondering if you think of, from conversations and things like that, common examples where there's a lack of self-awareness that's hurting church leaders and their ministries. Like if you talk about it now, some people listening would say, "Oh, that might be me." You know what I mean? Or you know what, we might have that on our team. Like, do you see some common ones in the church world?
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah. And everybody in the audience listening to this is just going, "Yeah, I've got a couple," right? So the people we usually hire have a drive forward. Like they're forward-looking people. I think you and I would fit that category. Most of the people listening to this would do that as well. It doesn't mean they're necessarily type A's. They could be helpers, but they have this forward movement. We want to move people forward, or this program forward. And anytime you have that, generally it's not common that there's an ability to look backwards and nurture those behind us and around us. And I got to help out and wrote for one of Barna's State of Pastors, I think, book that came out a couple of years ago. And David and the gang there at Barna did a study on the state of pastorate. And looking through that data, it's really eye-opening to see that many lead pastors don't really have an interest in developing other leaders, like 7 in 10. I think I'm shooting off the cuff here, so I apologize if I didn't get the number right. But it's like 7 out of 10 said that that's not what they want to be doing. And so we don't have this world in the local church or in ministry of necessarily caring for and nurturing people, because the people we hire are the people that are moving the bus forward. And so with that means that we don't often know how we react. We don't know how we come across, backwards. We don't understand when we hurt feelings. We aren't aware of, and I'm saying these things because these were true and can be true of me still. So I'm not pointing this finger outwards. But these are just the things that we have to stop and pay attention to, because here's the reality is, we're called to be like Jesus, and Jesus was the shepherd. And when you read the Gospels, and lately some of us watched this movie called The Chosen, this series of videos, you can see in a fresh way in the Gospels, when you read the Gospels, of how people responded to Jesus. And it's just a shepherding, nurturing relationship, very different from the Pharisees, who were much more about the rules and the law. And so we have to be careful in that moment that we're not taking on a model, say, of like a CEO executive driving forward and not caring for the people along the way.
Yeah, I think most people would think, if they haven't had an experience working at a church, that's going to be great. Like, it's going to be better than anything else I've ever worked at, because they are going to care, and they are, you know what I mean? I don't know if they think through like, oh, they're going to be self-aware, but there's going to be this better sense of care and love and a good workplace environment. But that's not always true, right?
No. Well, no. And I was on the phone yesterday with one of my students, graduate in a church situation, and they're leaving by July because they can't stay there. It's a toxic environment, the way the supervision's being done. And here's my heartbeat in this. And so one of the things that I do in a seminar that I've done before at conferences is how to supervise like a boss without being a boss. I think by and large, one of the this is your first takeaway on this podcast, supervision in the local church isn't usually done very well, by and large. I mean, it's rare that you see it done really well. And we need training on how to supervise. We need mechanisms that make meetings and supervision not to be this heavy thing, but very productive and forward moving and appropriate for the kinds of leaders we have in church. And so in this one church setting, here's a pastor that's been there a while, and I knew going in this was not going to be a good environment for the student, and I warned them, but they still went there. And now 2 years later, it's a problem. And so, it makes me sad, and it was the motivation for the book. And Mark DeVries said in Sustainable Youth Ministry book, he said, in spite of the glut of leadership books that exist out there in Christian circles, we still keep, and he used the phrase, stepping on the same landmines. It blows up. Like, we still make the wrong steps, and it just goes, and then it's just difficult. So it's getting better, I hope. But that's why I wrote the book. I want to have the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And in the book, a couple things that I want to ask about are the role of two different things in self-awareness. One, emotions, and two, our past, which you referenced earlier. But starting with emotions, speak to like our emotions and the role in self-awareness.
Yeah. So this chapter, by the way, was the chapter that took the longest. I paid the most to have outside editors and readers read it so we could get it right, because I wanted to make sure that we just were handling it appropriately. And I was speaking on the book in South Africa once and at a private school, and I mentioned that I think emotions tell us a story. Like, we should, when we have a reaction, an emotional one, even if someone doesn't see it, like our eyebrows lift a little bit or our shoulders tighten and we think we're hiding it. Just imagine that we take and one of my friends watching this talk said, you want people to take a reaction selfie. I said, yeah, that's it. Like, imagine you take a selfie of that reaction, and then later on, you just get a little notebook out, a little pencil, and you just say, why did I react that way? Because our emotions are like canaries in the cave. The coal miners used to carry a small bird into the cave, and when the bird would die, they knew the oxygen was going out. Well, I think emotions tell us sometimes what's going on inside, but we don't pay attention to them. So if I'm angry, why is it that I'm blocked? Why do I feel blocked? Because that's what anger often comes from, or ignored, or I'm not in control. Or is anger really because it's a kind of a shallow emotion? Is it telling me something deeper going on that I need to pay attention to? Or why is it that I feel so joyful in this moment? It's not all negative. Why is this moment making me absolutely joyful? What is it about that? And for that, once I remember I had that reaction, and I took a selfie, and later on I unpacked it, and it was because that I was involved in something that was evangelistic. And that was God's confirmation in my life that I deeply care at the end of the day most about people coming to faith in Christ. And so for me, evangelism, being a witness to the world, is top of the list because it can capture my emotions greater than anything else.
When I think about like that kind of awareness of your emotions and asking those questions, the thing I think about is, especially like if you think of anger, how do you learn to do it in the moment? You're right. Cause it's like, it almost takes that step back, that pause. And over time, I'm sure there's just you just get used to it. You work out that muscle and you can see it better. And I think of friends of mine who are parents, and I feel like they're really good with their kids, helping their kids in the same way. You know what I mean? Starting to process even at a young age. And I think that's awesome. I would like more of that skill, and I would love my kids to have more of that skill. But in the moment, how can people take that pause or that step back and evaluate that?
Well, it certainly is difficult. And this was my issue that started the book, was that about 7 or 8 years into ministry days, I was on a team of highly talented people, but I was reacting I was just reacting strongly. And I was right about the issues, but I was wrong in how I went about them. And I just wasn't aware of it. Now, I think I have people in my life who we talk through things. I'm not a big journaler, but I do jot notes every morning a little bit. It's like a page, maybe or two. And that's helpful for me to think through things. So this isolation during the virus is causing all of us to have emotions. I think all of us have been wrestling with things we maybe have never verbalized, and we have to go through and say, why am I experiencing that? And the problem is, the older you get, I think, the less truthful we can be with ourselves. And so I'm having these responses, but I'm really doubting myself right now. So in the moment, case in point, you asked this question, what is it about? I've always dreamed about working from home. I thought, this will be great, right? It'll be amazing. And yet I'm here now doing that, having everything I desired, and I'm not satisfied. Like I'm a fearful person sometimes. So you hear all the doom and gloom out there, and you go, we're never going to get out of this. Mm-hmm. So I have to unpack that. What does that come from? And I can trace some of the origins back to childhood. I can trace it to a lack of trust. And So this has been great. Like a lot of people probably listen to this and yourself. It's been great to move closer to Jesus in the middle of this, right? And that's what he wants. And that's what, he's stripping away some things that we thought had meaning in our life but really don't. And now he's wanting to be the one that sustains us. And so I think in those emotions, in those moments where we have emotions, drawing closer to Jesus, that abiding presence is where we start.
Yeah, and as you referenced, this season we're in now where everybody's at home and, churches aren't gathering and ministries happen digitally and people are on a million Zoom calls and all those kinds of things. It's a different context for sure. And, people are looking ahead, thinking about when things can reopen, just like you were talking about earlier about the college and you all were thinking about fall and commencement and all that stuff. But the other thing I wanted to ask you about is teaching in the realm of student ministry. And I want to talk about even, this context we're in now where they're not gathering. So that's happening in some other format or, in some cases, maybe it's just not happening right now. Who knows? But before we talk about the specifics of this season we're in, I just want to ask, what concerns do you have about teaching in student ministry today, having, been done this for some decades and worked in a college where you get to train up young leaders. And so you have a perspective maybe that some others don't. Are there any concerns that you have about the state of teaching in student ministry today?
Well, I don't necessarily have like a concern, but I think that I have some things I really want to advance. So I wrote another book, I already edited it, called Teaching the Next Generations. It's a book that colleges use. It's by Baker. It came out in 2016, and it's kind of an all-star lineup of people writing the chapters from various colleges around the U.S. and seminaries, and there are people in there that likely most people know. And in that, I wanted to advance a purpose of teaching, again, that's rooted in discipleship. So I talked earlier about drawing closer to Jesus. I think that's why we teach, is to help people grow spiritually in their relationship with God. And my concern is twofold with youth ministry. And one is that we equate teaching and curriculum with learning information. And so one of the twin sins of teaching is that we can be all minds on without hands on or hearts on, meaning that we can learn stuff, but we don't know what to do with it at the end of the day. Most talks I see in the youth ministry world are just that, they're talks. And at the end, if you go up to the speaker, you say, how did you do? Well, I think it went well. And how do you know? Well, I spoke well, right? And instead of thinking of it as presenting information, flipping it and saying, I want to be student-centered. Like the evaluation of how it goes is, how does this play out in their life? So you would then go to students and say, well, how did it go? And they would say, well, it went well because I did this. So the so what question, I think, is the first concern I have, is that we, at the end of the day, when we're done with our programming, aren't answering the so what question. Like we don't, that the students are asking. So we have to figure out what it is they're asking. I'll give a story in that in a minute. And the second one then is the opposite end of it. And it comes out of the, and I'm a worship arts person, I'm a music major back in the day. But, the idea that we're just, it's just a lot of show, right? As opposed to getting back to small groups and camps and retreats when we can do them again, and finding ways to have this lived out faith together in community. I think we're separated now, and we're realizing that when we come back together, it's not just sitting in rows and watching something. We can do that on Zoom, right? So now the ecclesiological question for churches and youth groups and children's groups is say, what does being together mean for us? How should it be different? And I'm hoping that church becomes more than just what it is right now. Sometime in some places where it's a delivery of a sermon preceded by music, and the music sets up the sermon, because that's all, we can Zoom that now. We're realizing that. So when we're together, what does that mean? And I think if youth ministries can revisit that, and I think at one time, that's what youth ministry was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It has roots. Even in the early 90s, it was about coming together and being a community. And so I think those are the two things. So I think that content matters. I think that helping people learn, but doing it in a way that integrates with their lives.
Yeah, and I feel like some of the conversation, of course, going around now in this context we're in is, things are different and churches are having to lead digitally and Zoom calls. And in some ways more personal. Like you can, even though it's through a digital platform, maybe you're getting a more personal connection with your pastor, like you're not sitting 300 feet away. You're maybe hearing them show up on social media or something like that personally, like you're like in their life a little more. And so I hear a lot of people talking about how to keep doing some of the digital stuff we're doing, going forward, even if things get back to a normal, quote unquote. But what you're saying too is you hope when we get back to that there's also a push maybe in the other direction of more relational, that it's like less of a show and one thing, but also more relationships. And I would imagine right now that's probably the thing that is helping sustain churches and ministries, is if you had good relationships and discipleship built in already.
Yeah, it's interesting in our highly individualized American culture how much we want to be together at a game, at a restaurant, at church, even around the dining room table. Yeah,
and so I think that's a great word of advice to not, to push more into the relationship and not depend as much on the teaching or the service, as I'll call it, for discipleship as we get back. And now would be a time probably when you can lean into that more. And that leads me to another question I wanted to ask, which was with what's going on. And again, who knows, it sounds like, states are going to have different paths back to a normal, what they used to have. And it's hard to say normal because it may never be like it used to be. But so everybody in the country might be in a different place. But what pivots do you think like student ministry leaders should be making now as they're leading and teaching their students? Maybe they're doing I know churches that are doing kind of like a live teaching element, or maybe it's been pre-recorded, but it shows like it's live, and they're doing Zoom for small groups, or it's both together. Some different things like that. But what are some things you think about that leaders should maybe consider doing in this season when they think about discipling students?
So I think this is a great time to experiment because you have some time and nothing's normal. But an area that is overlooked in youth ministry, but used to be a staple for youth ministry, is the area of art. And I don't mean like you're going to get on easels and, paint the tomb and the three crosses and stuff, but it's a way to express what's going on inside through art. And some places are revisiting this, but I think it's a powerful worship time, because all the worship choruses, they kind of sound the same. We've heard them over and over. But I spoke on a retreat once, and I had a guy named Rob, fantastic worship leader, was there, and this was a college retreat. And the first session, he did the music, with the guitar and everything, and I did the speaking. And the next session, I showed up, and there was no guitar, and the room was cleared out of chairs, and on the floor was this newsprint in the outline of the temple in the Old Testament. And he had an outer wall and an inner part and another inner part. And I thought, what is this guy doing? And I said, what are we doing? He said, well, my worship is art. I'm going, oh, okay. And I'm telling you, he had 3 questions, and they started on the outside. All the students, there's enough room for them on the outside writing art, and then moving in. And by the middle, there wasn't a dry eye in the place, because there's something about the drawing and the painting and expressing. And with really good questions, with a good teacher, it was a prayerful moment. So it was worship through contemplation. There was some music playing in the background as they were doing it, but that was really amazing. So we're in this time right now where we're separated, and students are incredibly creative, right? You can turn them loose on a digital art project where they can work collaboratively online through, Flipgrid or YouTube. There's all sorts of platforms out there that people can visit. The kids know how to do it. They can create videos, and it can be super powerful. So, we've been at our house, we watched The Chosen, which is a creative video about the culture and the time of Christ, which has been powerfully received by a lot of people. And imagine that students took a Bible passage that you wanted to teach, and they applied it to their lives and created something, a video or whatever. I think that is something that's missing in youth ministry. And I think going forward, we're using this more and more in colleges, like group projects. And I know some people don't like group projects because there's always that 1 or 2 there's one or two people that never work at it. Assume everybody's working their hardest, right? But I think in youth ministry, those are great opportunities right now, just to have some fun, right? And create some community. Because here's why. Okay, last thing. Sorry, Nick, on the long answer. But you've got those introverts. Like most people in a youth group are introverted, shy, and won't talk. Most of them, if you do the Enneagram, are like 9s or 6s, and they'll just sit back, maybe even 5s, and they'll just let all the other outgoing people talk. And you know this, that youth ministry programming rewards extroverts. Well, now your introverts can rise up. Your introverts can, shine. And I think giving them a chance to do that would be amazing.
Yeah, and that's a creative, different way to think about it, right? Like when you're thinking about ministering to students, and I imagine even if you did something like that with them, it'd be great to bring it back, and maybe is it like a way to share it with the group, or just celebrate some of the stories, which
absolutely
encourage others to do that more. Yeah. I mean, you might find the student that's, I don't know, never particularly thought of themselves like that, or it's been a while since maybe they've had a creative outlet like that, and maybe they'd be encouraged to do something in the season. That would be pretty cool. I know one thing that I feel, and again, as we're recording, we're 5 weeks in or so, and so it's still early enough into this season that as student ministries have adapted and changed. One thing that I know is interesting for us is certainly teaching over video is different, and what we're doing is it's live on Zoom, and then they're breaking out into their small groups with their groups, and it's one thing we have experienced teaching live. We have experienced teaching on video to then be played later. It is different to teach live on Zoom, right? Where they could be super distracted, as we all could be, right? On Zoom. And so I don't know. There's just something there too that I wonder about the effectiveness of being able to teach students in that platform versus pushing it out more to small groups and more of a discipleship kind of model that we probably would think of. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? And I mean, do you even have, I don't know, preference if you were leading students in a student ministry right now and it was virtual, how you would do that?
So I like I always have this phrase called teach in the sevens. And to me, more importantly is that you vary what you do, even in an evening. So let's say you're on a Wednesday night programming, you've got 70 minutes. I would think of that you're going to do 7 different things, and you're going to change about every 7 minutes. To me, that's more important than, and so I would go back and forth between a major presentation and small groups. Now, it's hard to do online, right? Because changing means you're having to, try a different method. And online, there's only like a few methods you could do. Mm-hmm. But you could find a video, do a small group discussion, and maybe you combine 2 sevens so that you're doing 14 minutes and then you push it out to small groups. And I may not be answering your question directly, but you push it out to small groups and they do something for 14 minutes, one thing for 7 and another for 7, and you come back together. And to me, that if you watch good communicators, about every 7 minutes, they do something different. They have a joke or a story. They lean in, they back off, I think the same is with programming, online or in person, rather than, these large 30 to 40 minute runs of either small groups or, large talks. Now, in person, I love small groups that last longer and discussion. So I like good content. And if I'm doing a ministry, and it's mine, I will want to have a teaching time of some length to make sure I've got that good content. But then I like people responding. So it's kind of probably not the answer you want, but I like they're linked together in some way. And that may not get at what you were asking or concerned about there. So I'm happy to do a follow-up.
No, it totally does. Well, and I think even what you're saying, because you're saying you already like to think in terms of 7s and 7 minutes and changing up things. And I guess what I feel like we're experiencing is if we weren't doing that before, we certainly should now, because the attention span seems even less. And even if we were, maybe it's shorter. Maybe it's, I don't know if it's 5 minutes, you know what I mean? But if you were doing that and it was 15-minute teachings, well, now maybe it's 2 things. There's 7, 8 minutes, but there's something in the middle, that's changing the focus and coming back. Because I do think as we go longer into this, both for this and in the children's world, lots of churches are putting content out there for their, parents to lead their kids in. It seems like the novelty is starting to wear off. And you know what I mean? The focus isn't there. And I could see that both for students doing some type of virtual groups or teaching or whatever it might be, as well as for parents leading their kids. But like what you're talking about, mixing it up, changing gears even more often, I could see would help keep the focus, which is probably a big challenge right now.
Yeah. And I just tell people, listen, the next time you're doing something, just put a little stopwatch, a little iPhone, maybe it's got a timer there, 7 minutes, and have it run, and just at every 7 to see how people are responding, especially with youth, especially with middle schoolers. And now adults, you can feel them squirm. You can feel them kind of go, it just is something about that 7-minute break. And my pastor is fantastic at interjecting a little story, or he'll just stop his sermon and go, hey, can I tell you something? I mean, it's like that, right? It's a large church. And he'll just, like he's going, hey, as an aside, hey, here's something. He just knows. And this is where, if you ever watched Ken Davis talk about the role of humor, if you tell a joke or a story at about the 7-minute mark, it gives people a chance to go, they laugh, ha, 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 hoo, and they're with you again. They re-up again for the next 7 minutes of your talk. And so I think that's just really important. But in youth ministry, I love changing the methods, or who's talking or what's going on, and think of the 7s. So there you go. That's your second takeaway today.
That's great. Well, it makes me think of our pastor. Our church was a plant about 15 years ago, and he led in student ministry for 13 years before that. And he's a great teacher. He loves teaching. He loved teaching then, and then grew into that, and of course has loved it as the pastor of our church these last 15 years. And he would call it the butt clock, like the 7 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is, before something has to happen, whether it was like an illustration, a conversation with somebody else, a joke, something just to almost release the tension there. And of course, like most people, he would say that it's shorter the younger they are, that clock is not as long, when they're younger. So that's absolutely true.
I think when you get older, it comes back around. There's some pretty antsy 70 and 80-year-olds. Hey, here's the thing, though, the danger in all this. Okay, so it's not just that you're changing methods, but your content still stays solid. So when I teach about teaching, and I do a lot of seminars in churches and places I go in and help do a day with their volunteers or whatever, panel discussions are great ideas, but by and large, unless you work really hard at them, at least 80% of them just flop because the content is assumed, and you have to really work at a panel discussion. And so there's some techniques to this, and keep things moving, and it's a rare thing to be able to do, but it's doable. So just because you're changing methods doesn't mean that the content is following in quality.
Yeah, that's true. And I've heard multiple people that lead conferences say panels get graded lower. And I've thought about that, even having been on one or sat in one, I thought what you're saying, it's because a lot of times you're just not getting the practical things you want. You know what I mean? You're either hearing too much about somebody's certain context, or you're hearing too little about how it actually is put into practice. You're getting a lot of the theory, I guess you could say. So that is a good reminder. And I know
there's some
conferences have seen that too.
Exactly. And to be fair, so this is so I have a company called Arbor Research Group. And part of what we do is we do church snapshots for churches. We help them with an annual survey that really gets inside what's going on. We do some work with organizations like InterVarsity, Christianity Today, help them with research, marketing, and stuff. And then we do conference evaluations. And I will tell you that people always say, oh, we don't like celebrities on the stage, or we don't like speakers. We just want to go and, can't we just all get along, and so forth and so on. The moment you take a recognized speaker off the stage and put a panel discussion, or you put multiple speakers up there, the ratings go down. We are so wired to have, hey, who's speaking? Hey, who's speaking? It's how we're wired. So you have to remember that as a leader, when I'm talking about teaching in the 7s, and if you're the main person in your ministry, children's ministry, youth ministry, family ministry, don't abdicate everything away to other people. You need to have a major role in at least one of those 7s every week. People want you to be the teacher. That's why you're hired. I remember when I was at a church, it was youth pastor. We had a church about 500 people. We had 3 youth groups, 5th and 6th grade, 7th and 8th. and 9 through 12. Well, we all met on the same night. And that was a big concern for people because they wanted me to teach in all three of them, and there's only one of me. So I had to be very conscious that I wasn't seeing one of them as second rate, and I rotated around. It was very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good reminder. Anything else you think of as we wrap up, whether it's about teaching or whether it's about self-awareness?
Yeah. Sure. Well, so the self-awareness book, I'll just say this, that in fact, I was on a Zoom call 2 days ago with someone totally unrelated to the book, and we were getting started, and finally she said, "Oh my goodness, you wrote Self-Aware Leader." And I said, "Yes." And she's a youth worker at a church, and she said, "I needed a book for my staff last year," and we went through it together, and she never put the two together, that I was the same person, right? So what's happening is that a lot of people who lead ministries with volunteers are finding the Self-Aware Leader to be helpful, and here's why, is that it does the heavy lifting on some topics that you may want to bring up with particular volunteers, and I write about it in the book, which gives you the freedom as the leader to say, "Oh, hey, Terry wrote about this in the book. What do you think about that?" You know, and what you want to do is have that person work on it. So I say the book does the heavy lifting. And now some people are using it like every year, every other year, or even every 3 on their training programs for volunteers because it helps them be better leaders. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, here's the question. If you have a pencil or paper, you can stop this and write this down. But if you can answer this question before you begin creating and designing a teaching experience, your teaching experience will go better, because the secret key is that you have to understand what the motivations are for your learners. If you can't get inside what matters to them, you can teach all you want, and it's not going to go anywhere. It won't be integrated into their life. This is a larger variation of the "so what" question that everybody's asking when they're in a teaching moment. So here's a question, and it comes out of the book, Teaching the Next Generations, and it's from Dave Ron, who said, this is a question you ask yourself, why should these people, so if you're in children's ministry, you would say these children or these kids, right? Why should these people actively participate in this learning experience? So it can be your weekly teaching time, it could be a Sunday school if you still have that, or a small group. Why should these people actively participate in this learning experience with me? So this is when you put yourself in there. You go, why is it that they would care what I have to say? Have I built a relationship with them? Do I have credibility with them? Am I close to them? Why should these people actively participate in this learning experience with me right now? So the last question then is, what's the context right now? How does this play out in their life? If they're middle school students on a Wednesday night, they want to know, how does this help me on Thursday morning? You know, how does it help me right now? Why does this matter? So that right now gets that application. And if you can fill in those 4 blanks, these people, this learning experience with me right now, you will think through your teaching experience so much better at a higher level, and you'll throw out a lot of stuff you thought, oh, it's really good. And you think it's really good because it's like fun or engaging or so forth, but it doesn't necessarily fit the grid of how that helps.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I love that. All the pieces of it, you know, they're really good. And I'm thinking, how can, by the way, you mentioned about somebody, you know, knowing of the book, but not knowing you and making the connection. When I told one of my friends that you were coming on the podcast, they were like, oh, love his book on self-aware leadership. I've read it. I give it to everybody on my team. I even give it to other ministry leaders. Like when they, you know, when we're having conversations about their context or whatever, I was like, give me some questions. And you know what? I didn't get any questions, but it was my fault. I waited till too late to ask. So
well, it's not a great book to give away, because when you give away a book on self-aware leader, you think, what is this guy trying to
say? Yeah. It's like, it's a book on dieting and nutrition, and a book on, not exactly great. No, he just said he recommends it and they love it. Cause I think a lot of times it probably comes out of conversations where it's like, yeah, that's hard. You know what? Sounds like, you know, your team there needs to go through this together, and they're probably like, yeah, they probably do. So how can people?
We worked really hard on the book to make sure it wasn't critical. There are a couple books out there on Christian leadership problems that when you're done reading the book, you feel like you're an awful person. And we really worked hard. And my buddy John Swanson helped with some of the questions and polishing up the book, and he writes at 300 words a day. He's a great author, and he helped me just make sure it was toned the way it needed to be. So yeah, Self-Aware Leader, IVP, you can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever. It's right from Ivy Press, and you can get bulk discounts from InterVarsity Press if you order directly. They'll help you get it affordable if you want to buy it for your team.
Cool. And how else can people connect with you? TerryLinhart.com, right? We'll link to that in the show notes among this other stuff.
Yeah.
Social media, anything like that?
So any at Terry Linhart on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, I'm there and happy to do that. And if, I do seminars on a lot of these topics in churches and regions. And I was supposed to be in Florida next week at a pastor's denominational thing. Of course, it's canceled. So talking about the book. But it's been great. It's been exciting. I was just a few weeks ago in Lebanon and Syria, war-torn Syria, talking about the Self-Aware Leader book, because in that culture, it's not something they talk about. And that was fantastic. The youth work going on in Lebanon and around the Arab world is really amazing, and it's worth our support. It's life-changing. It's making a difference.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, thanks for writing the book and on the other books we talked about, and for taking some time to talk today and within the specific context we're in. So, thanks for coming on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Oh, my privilege. Thanks for asking, Nick. Appreciate it.
Well, we recorded that interview a while back, kind of early on in the midst of COVID-19 and all of those things. And some of the action steps I think of coming out of there, they still apply, regardless of the season that we're in, whether your church is gathering in person soon or it is not. One is to get the book and to read it, The Self-Aware Leader, Discovering Your Blind Spots to Reach Your Ministry Potential. The best leaders are self-aware, and his book certainly will help. We talked through a little bit of that, but obviously getting that book, working through that yourself and journaling about it, maybe even having conversations with other people who will be honest with you about your blind spots, I think would be a really good thing. And then another action step is to push creativity among students. I mean, that is something that is more true now than when I thought about it when we had that conversation. So what are some ways you can foster creativity among students in your ministry, whether you're gathering in person or online only? And then the other action step I thought about is that question to answer before teaching. Why should these people, these students, these kids, whoever this is, actively participate in this learning experience with me right now? Answer that for your next teaching, and maybe it'll be a big game changer. Maybe it'll change what you write, what you focus on, the length of the teaching, how you break it up, what you leave them with. I mean, there's a lot packed into that question. I think that'd be a great question to finish with for sure. Well, you can get all the links and notes at nickblevins.com/episode 192. Be sure to check out the Huddle Up resource at nickblevins.com/servehq for communicating with your volunteers, and that new family retention plan at ministryboost.org. It's $25, but only for, a couple weeks, if that, by the time you listen to this. June 4th, it'll go up to $99, and then it will be part of our Ministry Boost membership, but that won't open again until summer. So I hope you all are doing well. Hope you're staying safe. You're navigating, decisions and questions and things during the midst of this time. If you haven't already seen it, grab the free COVID-19 Family Ministry Roadmap at ministryboost.org. That has a lot of the questions that church leaders need to navigate and decisions that we need to make, and then some ideas and some content to help as you navigate that. So be sure to check that out. It's free. You can download that. We keep updating it. We had a great conversation with Allie Evans about what it was like for Life Church to open a couple weeks ago. And, we're going to put that in there. It's also in the Ministry Boost Facebook group, which is open now for anyone. So if you want to check that out, you can jump in there and watch a replay of that video. So those are some of the free things that we're doing to help church leaders. We're also launching ministry networking groups. So if you want to be in a biweekly Zoom call with other church leaders who are in the same role as you and maybe a similar context, church size wise and all that, that's free as well. You can sign up for that. Go to ministryboost.org and email us, use the contact form, and we'll give you a link where you can sign up for those free groups. They're going to start in June as well. So we got a lot going on, all of it designed to help church leaders. If there's anything we can do to help you, just email me, and we would love to do that. So thanks for listening. Hope you have a great week, and I'll catch you next time on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.